Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Tuesday, the 14th of February, comes to you from London. And we'll start by looking at currencies as we normally do, then stock markets, commodities, where there's a lot of falls going on at the moment, and then last of all, we'll look at tech stocks and the last few stocks, my own stocks, and maybe just to give you a little bit more personal experience about what I'm watching on those stocks. So we start with the dollar index. It's still bullish above the cloud. We're down again this morning by 0.2%, but we are just nudging. Notice the Dow theory action here, just this higher high, potentially the higher low, just constantly just edging up the hill here. And having found support on the cloud, it is suggesting that the dollar is back in the frame, and we're seeing a new upside target not yet activated of 1.9% upside potential and a new uptrend. So dollar is starting to look good again, although it's not running yet as such. And if we look at the euro, the converse is true. We're below the cloud on all three time frames, so that is bearish. Some very scary downside targets. Very, very strong chance that the euro could collapse this year, according to the charts. And if we look at the 60-minute chart, this is the short term. We still do have these big downside targets: 101, 1009, which is 101, so 4 and 5% downside. Those still do hang over us, given this is on the 60-minute chart, given back in June and given in November, still hanging on over us. And we do then have these short-term upside targets. But notice, it won't take much to actually start negating these targets. Already there was a thrust target on this column that has actually now been deactivated because we've moved below the level it was given. We've got other levels here, 105.70, 104.81. Every time we move below a level where these thrusts were given, these targets progressively come off. So it is looking worrying again for the euro, even though it's up this morning by 0.25%. If we look at the Japanese yen, we see here dollar yen, dollar strengthening. We're above the cloud, not quite yet in the long term, and consequently haven't activated this new upside target. But if we move back above this level, we activate a 40% upside, 42% upside. That's quite substantial. So US dollar really does have long-term strength, still looking likely. Looking at sterling, below the cloud on the long term. The medium term, we're just starting to come through. Because the cloud has fallen so much, it gives sterling less work to do. We're just wandering through this cloud sideways. And on the 60-minute, we're sort of just coming back through this morning. We do have these downside targets still hanging over us. The long-term picture is still pretty bearish. Here we see 102, 102, 113, 116, lots of downside targets here. So still pretty scary for the sterling chart. And if we look at the medium term, again below parity here as well, with no real sign of upside targets. If the short-term chart, we do have some upside targets, 132, 129.40, and a downside target as well. Really, to get a heads up on where it's going in the short term, we want to go to the 1-minute chart. So just select the 1-minute chart on your system, press the T key, and we see we do have these targets. If we go to a smaller box size, it's not that clear. We don't have clear-cut thrusts. Interestingly, we do have a downside thrust target here and an upside thrust target. Which one will it play out? So we just have to watch that. If you're watching currencies that closely, keep an eye on the 1-minute charts. If we look at the sterling euro chart, sterling appreciating, bullish above the cloud on both the short term and the medium term, but the long term it's below the cloud. If we take a look at Swiss franc, sterling has improved again against the Swiss franc, just nudging this 126 level, but at the moment, and we are sort of bullish on the medium term as well, but the long term is still pretty bearish. So not looking as bad there. Against the Australian dollar, sterling does still look weak, bearish on all three charts below the cloud. We do have these downside targets. A new one just come in at 159, 155, which is activated. Looks like the strength of the Australian dollar is going to rule in that currency pair. Looking at the S&P 500, just looks amazing. Since we've broken out, we're just running every week. We're just marching up this hill. This is really since the Trump election. Just every week we're going up Markets love it. We had this sideways consolidation. We broke out of that. We're just running higher and higher. We've got great upside targets. We've got 19% in the long term, 11% in the short term. And if we look at the 60-minute chart, we've got amazing targets here as well. 1% upside to 23.53, then 23.71, then 24.61. 23.41 was given way back in June last year. Just shows these targets, you can't ignore them when you see them. And if you want to know what's happening in the short term on the S&P 500, if you're worried about a sell-off, the 1-minute chart is where it's going to show up first. And if we look at the 1-minute chart, again, it's upside targets here. No real clear signs of the downside. This is the 1-point chart. 23.42 is the next stop. Again, we're not seeing any clear downside. Remember, any downside thrust targets that were given are all negated because we're making new highs. So, US stock market looking pretty bullish. Nasdaq also looking pretty bullish. The 1-minute charts is where any new bearishness is going to show up. Taking a look at the Dow Jones, well above the 20,000 level now, 20,400. We really are waving goodbye to the 20,000, sub 20,000 level. Just breaking and running now. So there's the move up, sideways move. We're embarking on a new move up. Stocks just look amazing on the US market. Even the Russell 2000, which has been languishing a little bit, is starting to break to new highs as well. So we can see here on this chart, we're just breaking the levels that we saw in December to new highs. So yesterday we were nudging those new highs. So that's looking good as well. 5% upside on the short-term chart. This will give us another thrust target as well. It's looking better and better for all US stocks. Do have slight, the futures are down very slightly this morning, but very slightly, less than 0.1%. So no heads up as to which way the US is going to open today. Looking at the FTSE 100, down this morning, but bullish above all three clouds. Again, if we want to know whether this is new bearishness and it's got any significance to it, just take a look at the 1-minute chart. There's the dive this morning at the open. How does that look in terms of targets? If we go to, this is the 1-minute chart, we do have downside targets here, but really nothing suggesting that we've got clusters or any multiple downside targets. So this is just a setback for the FTSE that's looking very short term. FTSE 250 is bullish above the cloud. Really nice trend the last couple of weeks. 2% upside still to play for in the short term charts. Not lots of big long upside targets in the long term. We do have some medium term targets, at one here of 11%, so that's looking pretty good. DAX is bullish above all three time frames as well. The Nikkei did sell off a bit overnight, but it's still bullish on all three time frames. So whilst it was more than 1% down, no real cause for alarm. China continues to rise, up another 2% potential here, and it's really looking good. We've found support on this cloud in the medium term. It'd be great to see this long-term chart wandering out. China was the big global worry several months ago. Hang Seng just coming through on the long-term chart as well, so looking better and better all the time. And the Sensex down very, very slightly overnight, but in fact still looking very, very bullish in the long run. The Australian market very slightly down, but we've got these long targets to play for here. 3%, 5%, lots of upside potential, clustering. We'll get a new thrust off this chart as well. You need to wait for it to lock. We need to lock and then activate it, but we can just go and put a target on there just because that has locked that column, and that's a 7% upside if we break higher, looking like we will. So Australian market looking pretty good. Looking at Brent crude, we did have a bearish day yesterday, really stuck in a range for this time of year, very unusual. Normally we're really, you can see here on the weekly chart, we're normally going nicely up the hill during this time of year, frustrating a lot of traders just in this tight range, and we see that through on the weekly chart, just a really tight range, making crude quite difficult just trading the range at the moment. But we do have these upside targets, and when we do get a break, it almost certainly will be to the upside based on the seasonality and the fact that we're above the cloud on all three time frames. And the same with WTI, we're seeing that as well, just that tight range, and again we've got upside targets. Heating oil, much the same. Very similar picture, just stuck in that range. US nat gas, moving back below the cloud on the daily. That's bad news for nat gas. We're really, really well below the cloud here on the 60-minute chart. Nat gas really not looking good. And if we take a look at the 1-minute chart, this is where we'll get the heads up for the targets. And we see here downside on the 1-minute 283, 279. That's 3 and 4.5% downside respectively. It's all looking very downhill at the moment. And that's quite worrying. Notice as we go to the short-term targets, this one given on the 10th of February at 281, that was given. You just can't ignore these targets when they're given, and that's now looking more and more likely, and we're seeing here just a plethora of downside targets. Notice all the upside targets have been negated. So if we take a look at some of the other commodities, we're really seeing some big falls here. Coffee below the cloud on the medium and the short term. We look at sugar again below the cloud here on the medium and the short term. Commodities just not looking great at all. Cotton is looking better. It's above the cloud on all three. And if we look at cocoa, we're really very seriously bearish here. So a lot of the softs not looking great. Looking at gold, gold we've been pretty bullish on actually just recently because of this run that we've seen off the lows from December. A really big move in the new year. The bounce on the lagging line on the cloud. Interestingly, we've got a new downside target not activated on this chart. We need to move below the level, remember, for it to be activated. And this upside target on the medium-term chart is activated. So we've got a very mixed picture. Downside on the long term, upside on the medium term, potentially downside on the short term, and we're below the cloud here. In fact, the cloud positions are still not quite bullish on the medium term either. So it's in a state of flux. Let's have a look at the 1-minute chart. If we look at the 1-minute chart, that might just give us a bit of a heads up. Press the T key on your system. So we do have an activated downside target here. That's a 2x3. This is the 1x3. This is a better box size. I'm changing the box size down in this bottom right hand corner. 1x3. We see here we've got 1250 not activated and 1208 activated. So it does suggest at the moment a little bit of downward pressure. Interestingly, notice the targets that were given here in February, given and met. So when targets are given and met, that's a bullish confirmation signal. Then we had a downside target that was given, not quite met, and a new upside target. If we don't meet this target, that is bullish confirmation that we didn't meet the downside target. So we didn't quite get there. The bearishness didn't actually play through. The bullishness did play through here. Here the bearishness didn't play through. So it does look like gold might well just start going back to the top. And we go to smaller box sizes still. We notice the downside targets given. And we do have the downside targets here hanging over us, but we've got a new upside target as well. And we can go even smaller still. This is a bit really on gold. We're starting to get to very small box sizes, and it's at $1,200. It's quite heavily denominated. We've got just a mixed picture basically. The 1-minute charts will show us though where things play out. Silver, we're just bullish above the cloud in the short term, so that's a lead indicator quite often on gold. That's good news. And if we look at copper, copper really had a big move yesterday as well. And we again want to get a heads up: is this going to run? Is it going to continue? Take a look at the 1-minute chart. Here we go. Press the T key, and we see here that we've got upside targets here as well. So just going to the short term, the 0.25 dollars, we see here 25-cent chart. We're seeing upside targets, so thrusts here to play for. So looks like this move in copper is not yet done. Looking at the US government bond, really significant here. We're at 244 percent, 2.44%. We do have this 248, but more importantly, the medium and long term 275, 279 does look like we're going into the 270s for Treasury yields on the 10-year. Taking a look at tech, we've got Apple here. We see on Apple that we are bullish on all three time frames. 150 is the upside target of the short term. That's 1255. 143, that's 7-8% upside. So a lot to play for here on Apple, just really motoring at the moment. So one bellwether that's really driving forward. Google back above the short-term cloud as well. Amazon, again, bullish on all three time frames. And last of all, these are the three stocks that I do hold, so I should declare an interest here. Facebook, very interestingly, that we are taking out that November high now, so that is significant for Facebook. Just having had a real sort of period of not moving higher. We're seeing now that we are just gradually edging higher, and on that weekly chart that's clear. The thing that's really quite amazing here is these upside targets, 140, 141, that's a 5% upside in the short term. That's a cluster. The medium term chart, just lots of targets here, 30%, 22%, 26%. All upside targets thrust off those thrust columns, and the same on the 1% chart. We're just seeing long-term upside potential here. So it really just is lots of targets to the upside, which is what I like about the stock. If we look at Microsoft, again we have upside targets here. We're back above the cloud in the short term. That giving us 2 or 3% upside. Not stellar targets the way we see on Facebook, and not as many of them, but we still do have upside potential here of 28 and 30% according to these long-term charts. Last of all, Nvidia. Causing me quite a lot of interest at the moment. Nvidia is a stock I bought back in last year, and we'll look at that in a bit more closely. But the big question is that it came out with results last week. The results were great, but of course they've run a lot, so the market was expecting a lot. So the big question is Nvidia now a sell? We see here that we've moved back below the cloud. We don't have a downside target on the 60-minute chart that's to play for. We still have these upside targets of 24 and 32%. So there's still more upside potential potentially, but the interesting thing is we've crossed the cloud. The decision I have to make is, do I want to sell? And so the interesting thing from starting point is, if you press the S key on your Updata system, we put on an optimized stop loss. And in fact, this is roughly where I bought Nvidia. I bought them when they broke out here. I actually sold them because they'd sold off here last year, and ended up buying them back again because we got new upside targets. So it's not a crime to buy them back, but I bought them back, sold my original holding just around here, so that I actually have got what's left is a free holding. They've more than tripled, so I've got more than double my original holding and my original holding back. So I'm sitting fairly happy with this stock. But the interesting thing is there is the key level. That's at about 98, just below 100. 100 was the closing level, the opening level there. So we do have this 98, and then the upside. The stop loss has gone to 105. What's interesting is that it shows you that we've had to live with quite big periods of volatility. It's around 10% stop loss, 10.9, so let's say 11%. So 105 is a level that I'm watching quite closely, and ultimately 100. The big thing here, just really looking at, is we've got this: will we break higher or will we break lower? And that's really the pattern that I'm watching for at the moment. Where will we end up in that? And of course the other thing to look at is the 1 minute chart, and if I do that, press the T key, I do have 106. Remember, 105 was the level that I was watching. Go to a smaller target still, 105, 106. I'm not seeing anything that's really dramatically worrying me, 107, 107. I've got to be prepared to live with that pullback, basically to decide whether I want to keep riding this. Having sold this once before and bought it back, I'm just a little bit more patient with it. That's just a little bit of a heads up of the sort of things that you have to deal with technically in watching the stock. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.